were located on Craigslist by Detective Zeke Morse. Efforts were made to locate those computers, and they were in fact located in Wake Forest, North Carolina. The individual that had one of the computers at that time identified Ronald Anthony and Travion Smith as the individuals that had attempted to sell one orange laptop to him. Ronald Anthony had attempted to purchase one off Craigslist, and then on May 21st, Travion Smith did in fact sell a silver laptop that was associated, or was the one that was stolen from the downstairs apartment on the same night Miss Melissa Huggins-Jones was murdered. Officers were able to locate Ronald Anthony and Travion Smith. They brought them downtown for questioning. During the course of their questioning, Mr. Smith and Mr. Anthony identified Sarah Redden, our defendant in this case, as someone that had been with them that night leading up to the events. They never would, during that point, never would confirm that it was them that went into the apartment and in fact killed Melissa Huggins-Jones, but instead kind of pointed the fingers at each other. But they did say that Sarah Redden was there, and eventually acknowledged that she was a sort of lookout for the different crimes that were going on that night. Miss Redden was brought in for questioning that night. She voluntarily came down to the police station with her mother. She, to start with, in being interviewed by Detective Gill, was very evasive in terms of what she would tell Detective Gill. She laughed several times during the interview, which was, as things went along, very concerning to the state. Wouldn't tell Detective Gill a whole lot of information. Eventually, as it became clear that investigators were talking to Ronald Anthony and Travion Smith, she did eventually make the statement that they said some shit went down and they had to do what they had to do. She said at that point she didn't question them, that they had said a lady screamed, and that Travion Smith said that he did hit her, but that's basically it. She, at all points during that interview, did maintain that she did not go into the building, and to be fair to her, Mr. Smith and Mr. Anthony at no point ever put her inside the apartment. Miss Redden was arrested that night in conjunction with Mr. Smith and Mr. Anthony. She was able to, she got a lawyer, Miss Godwin, and Miss Godwin contacted Mr. Jeff Cruden, who was the lead prosecutor on this case originally, contacted Mr. Cruden and let him know that Miss Redden was prepared to make a statement. She did so on June 25th, 2013. Mr. Cruden was present, I was present, and Detective Sean Brady, who's here in the courtroom, was present at that time. She was given the opportunity to kind of come in and clear the air and tell us everything that happened that day. It was made clear to her that no promises were made to her, that this was her opportunity to come in and talk with the state about what happened that night. She went through her background and kind of where she was living, and then when things turned to the night in question, she gave us some details regarding some of the information you heard in the trial about breaking into cars in the North Hills area. She told us about the Ben and Jerry's incident, in which there was a dispute at Ben and Jerry's. She told us about going to Bonefish, and then going into breaking into cars in the Allister neighborhood prior to the murder. She maintained during that interview that she was, again, kind of a lookout during the car break-ins, and that she was positioned in one of the other apartments under construction, and that Ronald and Travion went to another building that appeared to be occupied. She at that point assumed they were going to break into more cars. She stayed in her position for a while, and when they didn't come back, she went over to the apartment that appeared to be occupied. And that's the first time in which she tells us that she did see Travion Smith come out on a balcony and wipe it down, and she didn't know why he was up there at that point. And she proceeds to go on and say that she went to the fence line after she sees Travion wiping that balcony down and indicating that Ronald Anthony is inside. She then goes to a fence line that is near the apartment. Ronald shows up first, and then Travion. At that time, she notices some things that she had not noticed before about Ronald and Travion. They had laptops with them. And water bottles that they appeared to be washing their hands with. As you've heard, they go on to a motel that night. She would maintain that on the June 25th interview, she would maintain that it was Ronald that called someone to come pick them up, that in the car she saw Ronald produce a knife that had blood on it. She saw Ronald produce a iPhone that she did not recognize prior to them going over to that building, that he tried to sell to the driver of the vehicle. She was observing this conversation and these things as Ronald produced them. She would tell us at that point, or did tell us at that point, that she was in the back seat with Travion, and while she was in the back seat of that car, she did see blood on Travion's clothes at that time. As you heard, they went to a motel off of Capitol Boulevard. They stopped at Flashbacks beforehand. At that point, she did ask Travion what had happened in the apartment, and at that point, he said, "Don't talk about it." When they went to the hotel, and this I kind of wanted Your Honor to understand kind of where I'm going with this a little bit. On June 25th of 2013, there was quite a bit of conversation, according to Ms. Redden, about what was said in that hotel room, which will differ from what I will tell you was told to us later and what you heard at trial, but I think it's important for you to understand kind of how this case developed. She said when they got into the hotel room, Ron said that they just got a body, that the woman shouldn't have screamed. Trey adds, "I wish I didn't hit her." Sarah asked why, and at that point, Ron says they were searching for keys to get what they could get. They walked in the room, that Miss Huggins-Jones was in the bed and woke up and began screaming, that Trey came up from behind and started punching Miss Huggins-Jones first, and Mr. Cruden and Detective Brady and myself all had clarified at that point that Travion, he goes by Trey, was the first one to hit her, and she said yes. That Ron had to hit her too because she was screaming. Then Ron produced a knife, but at that point that Trey got the knife from Ron and that Trey stabbed her first. Then Ron takes the knife and stabs her to make sure that she's dead. They didn't want her to wake up and ask why they felt they needed to kill her. It was because at this point they'd seen their faces and wanted to make sure that she couldn't identify them. You did hear the chilling testimony during the trial itself about when we asked about the little girl down the hall, as we all have known to be Hannah, and at that point she said, in regards to asking about the little girl in her room, glad she didn't wake up so wouldn't have to do that to her as well. And that's the statement that she gave us back on June 25th of 2013, and I've counted the times and I don't remember, but it's essentially Travion and Ronald passing the knife back and forth, and I know you've had an opportunity to review that, but they're passing the knife back and forth, equally hitting her, equally sharing the blows that would lead to Miss Melissa Huggins-Jones' death. At that time, on June 25th, she again tells us about selling the laptops with Ronald about a week later on May 21st of 2013. As cases progress through the courthouse, there's no other way to say it, but things take a while. Mr. Cruden left the office, and myself and Ms. Shakita became the prosecutors that were handling this case. And as we were preparing for Ronald Anthony's trial, which was scheduled to start in July 2015, it became time to do a witness interview with her, a trial prep interview with Ms. Redden at that point, and myself and Detective Brady in that around early July met with her, or end of June, met with her, and just kind of in a very informal setting. I wanted to check on her, make sure she was doing all right, and at that point she began to tell us some things that differed from her initial statement, in that essentially she took Travion out of the conversation that happened in the Super 8 motel. The detail that she provided in terms of what was said in that hotel became more vague, that she essentially put everything on Ron at that point, that it was Ron that had done all the stabbing. She did maintain that she had seen Travion outside on the balcony wiping it down, and that she did see the blood afterwards, and that he did make the statement about what the hell just happened in there. But in terms of detail, in terms of who was inflicting what blows and when, she at that point said that it was more of Ron, that Ron was the main culprit, and that she took Travion out of the equation to some extent. Certainly, I asked her at that point, and then she was formally interviewed on July 6th, 2015, in which she maintained that same statement that she told Detective Brady and myself in late June, and asked why the change, what was going on, and at that point she said that Ron was her boyfriend at the time, and we of course knew that already, but that he had control over her, and that she was, I don't want to put words in her mouth, and I know Ms. Godwin will speak to more of this later on, but that she loved him and wanted to somewhat, I guess, minimize the role that he played in the murder itself. So at that point, Ms. Shakita and I talked with Ms. Redden extensively, Ms. Godwin extensively, had several other trial meetings, witness meetings before trial, and she did continue to, at that point, maintain the statement that that you heard from the witness stand in terms of what happened there on that night, the night in question. I will say during the trial that she did testify as to her being the lookout for what she thought were car break-ins, and then that when they came out, that she did see the water being poured on the hands, that she did see the knife in the car, and then when they got to the hotel room, that she did make that statement about what the hell just happened, and attributed it to Travion clearly knowing what was happening in there. And she did in the trial maintain the statement about glad that the little girl didn't wake up so that they didn't have to do that to her. As the basis for the accessory after the fact charge, Your Honor, and in talking with Sarah Redden and her attorney and what we saw there during the trial, I'm not going to stand here and say that she knew a murder was going to happen in that apartment when those two guys took off. I believe and I hope that I'm right about this, that she had assumed they were going to continue to break into cars, or at least go into unoccupied apartments and find what they could. But I do believe when everybody got back in that car and she's seeing a blood with knife on it and computers that she hasn't seen before and blood on Travion's clothing, at that point she knew, or certainly any reasonable person should have known that something bad had happened in that apartment. And she didn't take any steps to call the police, call anybody. I think at one point maybe she said she wanted to tell her friend Troy, but she didn't reach out to anybody in a position that could help solve this case any sooner than it got solved. And then when she came in, again, there was kind of a cavalier or flippant attitude about all this, and she's 18 years old. I recognize that. It's hard to sit here and say, what anybody would do at 18 years old when they find themselves in this position, but certainly when you're aware that a murder has occurred, or at least somebody is, well, at that point she would have been, because they clearly saw it on the news, and she told us that they were looking at it on the news. So she knew a murder had happened, and she didn't reach out to anyone. And then furthermore, she continued to help Ron sell the computers that were associated with the murder, and in fact was involved with selling those laptops, or at least the orange laptop, to Julius Bumpers that you heard from during the trial. as far as the car break-ins go that we've alleged, Esther Hall, who you heard from during the trial, she's the lady that testified that her car was broken into on the night in question, and that she did see 2 African-American males and 1 female out around her car breaking into a neighbor's car, and then hers was broken in at the same time. And then Claire Reynolds, her car was broken into in the parking lot, as you heard, and we heard about her iPod and how Travion Smith had it at a later date. So certainly she was at least a lookout, in breaking into those cars as well. That would be a factual basis had this matter proceeded to trial. Be glad to answer any questions if the court has any.
That's fine, thank you. Ms. Godwin, do you have anything you wish to add with respect to the factual basis, ma'am?
No, Your Honor.
All right. The defendant's plea is hereby accepted by the court and is ordered recorded. I'll hear first from the state with respect to sentencing, and then we'll turn to Ms. Godwin.
Your Honor, I've asked Ms. Scott, who has been here, and the family has been here through motions, trials, and certainly Ms. Shakita and myself and the whole DA's office appreciate the support that they've shown us throughout this trial. It means the world to us. They've been here, and they do not wish to make any statements. I know you've heard from them before. They've been consulted about this plea. They know what's happening and what the options are, and they're behind it. Largely, what we told them is that we spoke with some jurors about Ms. Redden's involvement, and I won't point them out, but there are some jurors here that we certainly appreciate them being here as well. And I guess I can kind of start there. Is that Ms. Shakita and I viewed Ms. Redden's testimony as credible when she testified. That was the report that we got from some, I won't say all of them because we haven't met with all the jurors, but from some of them that they did find her credible. They were very interested in the shoe print and did need some, I guess, forensic evidence to corroborate what she said and what Melvin Brown said. But the general view of what we got, or feeling of what we got from everybody that witnessed the trial and was involved with the trial, is that when she finally did testify, that it was credible and believable and consistent with what happened. At the end of the day, there's 3 people that really know what happened in that apartment that night. Melissa Huggins-Jones, unfortunately, isn't with us anymore, and the other 2 decided not to give us any details. But in terms of what she did that night and what she told us, I believe is consistent and believable with what else you've heard, and that's why we brought the people from Ben and Jerry's and Bonefish that corroborated what she said. In terms of sentencing itself, and Detective Brady, I do need to thank him as well. He's been here throughout this trial and working with us and working with dealing with some of the issues that came up because of Ms. Redden. But in terms of sentencing itself, I told Ms. Godwin, and I'll tell Your Honor, that in terms of the actual sentence, we're going to leave it in your discretion. You've been with us throughout this trial, through the motions and the trial itself. You've heard her, you've seen her. We'll leave the actual sentence in your discretion. What I do feel it's necessary to say is, I've given you the good points about what Ms. Redden said, but on the flip side of it, you've heard what she said in June of 2013 and the detail that she gave. And then for her story to flip in July of 2015 was concerning towards the state and caused a lot of issues, and quite frankly, and I don't know this, but had her statement not flipped, I don't know that we would have had the second trial. Mr. Anthony pled based on everything that he knew, and when Mr. Smith learned of this change in statement by Ms. Redden, obviously he, I don't know if he was going to plead to start with or not, but certainly her change in story did not assist in resolving this case without a plea. And then kind of the cavalier attitude at times was concerning to the state as well, in listening to jail phone calls and all, just in terms of, I don't think she got it, what really happened. And you've got this family here that's been through hell and back, and it was serious, and I don't know what it took for her to finally get there. And I think Ms. Shakita and myself finally had, I know Ms. Godwin was working with her, but we had to let her know what was really happening here and how important this was to us and to this family, and that's what this is all about, is helping them. And I think she finally got it at the end. I just wish it hadn't taken so long to get there. But that's kind of what I have to say about that. So I'll leave the active sentence in your discretion. Would ask that you suspend the breaking and entering sentences, motor vehicle sentences at the end of the active sentence and place her on supervised probation. There's a reason for that. This is a young lady who has shown herself to be susceptible to outside pressures, whoever she's involved with, and I think a period of supervised probation in which after she's released from prison will be good for her to have somebody watching over her that she has to report to, and I've talked with Ms. Godwin about that. I believe you'll hear that she's in full agreement with that as well. So I would ask that you accept the plea. If you have any questions or need to hear anything else from the state, I'd be glad to answer.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, Ms. Godwin, I have received some information from you prior to this hearing. I've received and reviewed two forensic neurological reports that are, I've signed an order sealing those, and just for record purposes, those are one with the report date of March 14, 2015, and one with the report date of April 11, 2016. I've also received audio recordings of, I think, 8 conversations, jail phone conversations. I've received and reviewed those as well. So I'll hear from you now, Ms. Godwin.
Your Honor, before I begin my remarks, I want to make the court aware that I do have Dr. Ortiz, Dr. Herkins here, should the court feel a need to hear from them personally regarding their findings through their evaluations of Ms. Redding and how that impacted her role in these events. I also have my private investigator, Jerry Wiggs, here, who interviewed numerous people that
Can you turn that microphone? I'm having just a little trouble hearing you.
I can tell.
Thank you.
Yeah, my investigator, Jerry Wiggs, here, who interviewed a number of people and is prepared to testify concerning the nature of those reviews that will corroborate the information that I'm proffering to the court at this time. And if you need to hear further from him, he is available as well. Ms. Redden's family's here. Excuse me. She's got her parents and siblings and grandparents are in the courtroom to show their support as well. Your Honor, what I want to talk about, and I'm going to go through my complete presentation, and then if the court requires evidence from witnesses, I'll call my witnesses. But I want to talk about predators and prey. I want to talk about damages and deficits. I want to talk about passive participation, and I want to talk about where we go from here. Ron, Anthony, and Travion Smith were predators, and they preyed on anybody that had anything to offer them, financially or material. They were both homeless because their families would not allow them to even live in their own homes. During the trial, I'm sure you heard testimony that Ron's mother would not allow him to live in her home and that his clothes were kept in the trunk of her car and she would meet him so he could change clothes. Ron preyed on anybody he could find to get money, to get food, to get clothing, to get shelter. He preyed not only on the people that he broke in cars and stole from them, he preyed when he was breaking into Ms. Huggins-Jones' apartment. He preyed on Amber, his other girlfriend, but he also preyed on Sarah Redden as well. He met Sarah Redden through a co-worker of Sarah's at Andy's Pizza in Wake Forest. Once they met, Ron began preying on Sarah Redden, and he would have a habit of showing up when she was at work so he could get her tip money. He knew what day she got paid. He came on strong in the beginning and was courting her, and as you can tell from her background and what you learn through the forensic reports, that Miss Redden was a young girl in desperate need of love and attention and was willing to be receptive to it from any direction that it came. And it came from Ron. Once Ron had wooed her and had control over her, he began to exert control in other ways: physical abuse, emotional abuse, always to keep control of her. He told her she was his exclusive girlfriend, but we heard from Amber when she testified at trial that she was his girlfriend. And in Ron's jail interview when he was arrested and interviewed by the detectives, when asked about Sarah Redden, Ron Anthony referred to her as his side bitch. And that's how he treated Sarah, but she didn't understand that because from her background, when love hurts, that's normal. Her family began to be able to tell that there was a change in her after she became involved with him. They began to suspect the abuse. One time he had bruised her legs so severely that it caused concern from her mother. Her brother had felt like she was wearing more makeup at times to hide the abuse. Another friend had noticed that she was wearing long sleeves and long sleeve pants and at times even a hoodie, and whether that was inappropriate, and became concerned that it was to conceal abuse. They made efforts to try to get her away from Ron, but Ron was more powerful, and she was afraid of Ron. Ron bragged about his gang affiliations. He told her if she ever left him, he would kill her. He threatened her and assaulted her at times. And so she continued to stay in the relationship, not really understanding how she could extricate herself from it. She finally moved to a friend's house here in Raleigh as she was working at Highway 55 Diner at Crabtree Valley Mall so she could walk across the street to work. Sarah's always worked for what she had. She's worked since she was 16 years old. Her first job was at Smithfield Barbecue. She went from there to Andy's, then I think, or maybe to Andy's to Smithfield and back to Andy's, and ultimately at Highway 55, and she was working there at the time of her arrest on these charges. Ron would show up there and take her tip money. He would come and get her to feed him, to get him a hotel room. Travion started tagging along, and now there were two instead of the one. The interviews with the individuals that Mr. Wiggs talked to, people in her family would tell you that she worked to provide for her son, that when she had her child, Caden, that she made it very clear to everyone that it was her child and she wanted to take care of him, that she was the one who would get up in the middle of the night when he cried or needed anything, that she wanted to feed him, she wanted to change his diapers, and she wanted to provide for him. And the monies that she was earning before Ron Anthony came in the picture went directly to the support of her son. But Ron did come in the picture, and he did prey on Sarah. And during that window of time that they were together, there were occasions where she and Travion and Ron were out, and they were entering cars that were unlocked and taking things from them, and she did in fact act as the lookout. However, on those same nights, they were taking her money that she had worked out that day, and she did not profit or benefit in any way from what they were taking from these cars. Even when they were preying on hardworking people who had left their cars unlocked, they were still preying on Sarah's money that she had just earned. Sarah was with Ron and Travion on the night this happened, and it started out with them doing the B&Es of the cars, and then, as Mr. Waller talked about, they left her in an apartment that was under construction, and in Travion's statement to the police when he was interviewed, he corroborated that you know, they were in an apartment that was under construction, and Ron told Travion to come with him and told Sarah to wait there for them. So I think it's undisputed that she was in this apartment. They left, she presumed maybe to go, they call it checking cars, see if the doors are unlocked. She presumed they went to check other cars, and when they didn't come back, and they didn't come back, and they didn't come back, her first thought was that they had left her, because Ron had left her at places before. to figure out for herself how to get home. And but she did go. She did get reunited with him as she saw Travion on the apartment, and then tried to leave the back of the apartments. She was planning to call a friend of hers to come and get her, and Ron met her there at the fence line, and they ended up going through the night together, as Mr. Waller explained. Miss Redden is not so very different from any other woman who has had the same or similar background and finds herself vulnerable to being victimized. We all know that this battered woman syndrome crosses all classes, all demographics, all education levels, all financial levels, and Miss Redden definitely would fall into that category. And what happened with her is when she was learning what had happened in that apartment, from what she could put together from what Ron was talking about, it only made her more afraid of them. And she finally got dropped off at her friend's house the next day. She talks about the struggle she had wanting to tell somebody. She was out there talking with Troy's father, her friend Troy's father, and she was telling him, I got to tell you something, I got to tell you something, but just couldn't bring herself to go there because she was afraid. When she did get arrested, they talk about her cavalier, flippant attitude, and that's a reflex system she has. When she's scared, when she's upset, when she's afraid, when she doesn't know what to do, she goes behind a mask. And I'm sure the doctors would talk about how that's not an uncommon thing for people who have experienced the levels of trauma that Miss Redden has experienced in her life, and the times that she has had to find a way to numb herself to the pain and the fear that she's experiencing in the moment. She did talk about what happened. As time went on, she talked more about what happened, and then as it came time for Mr. Anthony's trial, she said, I can't testify that Travion told me he hit this woman. I cannot testify to that. I cannot testify truthfully to that. When I first got arrested, Ron had so much psychological and emotional control over me that I was afraid to talk about his words being the only words about assaulting this woman. I was just afraid. I was confused. I was afraid he was my boyfriend, and I told more things that Trey said than I should have. And as time went on, she said it ate at her, and it ate at her, and it ate at her, and she just could not come in here and put her hand on a Bible and testify to that. She would testify to what she knew for a fact she heard, and she would not testify to what she assumed. And but when she walked into a courtroom, she wanted her testimony to be the clean truth and not any effort to minimize Ron's role or exaggerate Travion's conversation in any way to try to balance out what happened. The state called her as a witness, and she did testify. The judge you had a chance to hear her testimony. She was candid. She was the witness that could tie the events of that night and the events in the aftermath together for the state, and she did so without any agreement as to what her plea arrangement may or may not be after the fact. When we talk about passive participation, what Ms. Redden actually did regarding the events surrounding the burglary and the homicide in that apartment, she wasn't there when they went into the apartment. She was not in a conspiracy to go into that apartment. She had no idea they were going to go into that apartment, and she stumbled into it looking for them, thinking they were checking cars. When she sees Travion, she says, "We need to go." Not, "I'll wait for you, hurry up and get a bunch of stuff." It's like, "We need to go." And when they didn't come down right away, she left to leave them there. Once she finds out what happens into the apartment, she's already with them. She's not in a position to leave them at that point because of their control and her fear of them. Her mother would testify, And her friends would testify that when Ron was with her, he would take her phone if any family member would text or call, and he would respond and say, "Don't come get her, you can't have her." And so she's with them. When she gets away from them, she's still afraid. She's not the only one that was afraid of Ron. Ron and Travion had an altercation with Joey, a friend of hers that she worked with, and he has told our investigator about that altercation, but he's also talked about how Ron would brag about his gang affiliation and how he could have people harmed and would threaten people with his gang affiliations. So she's scared. You've read from her background and her family situation at that time that she was not somebody with the kind of resources that she needed to rely on in that set of circumstances, and she was drowning in this all on her own. She's 18, probably going on about 13 or 14 emotionally and socially due to the difficulties that she's experienced. And you've seen the forensic testing regarding her IQ and her deficits and her processing and those sorts of things. Dr. Huggins has told me that you put all of that together, and the more pressure Ms. Redden has on her, the less able she is to make a good decision. She was 18 when she was arrested on these charges. That's very young, and you've read what Dr. Ortiz talks about, the development of the brain and how that affects teenagers in their judgment. We've seen grown people in the same set of circumstances Ms. Redden's in exercise extremely poor judgment in greater ways than she did. Ron and Travion did not need Ms. Redden either before or after the fact for this homicide to occur, or for them to take the same actions they did after the fact. Ron and Sarah were together that one day regarding the laptop, but it was Ron Anthony who had advertised the laptop, who had arranged the event. She's just there probably to provide because he would want to eat, and he had gotten up with her for money, not because she was facilitating the sale of this laptop. She's accepted responsibility primarily for what she did not do after the homicide. We all believe that the right thing to have done would have been to call somebody and say something so that the homicide could have been solved sooner rather than later, but she did not do that, and she has served already a 3-year sentence and has more left to go, whatever the judge may decide. When she was first arrested, she had a 1-year-old son who's now 4. My investigator would tell you what struck him when he was interviewing her family members was the phone rang. And the first thing the little boy says was, "Is that Mommy?" Because that's their lifeline. She tries to call him 3 times a day. She just went through a child custody hearing with Caden. Her mother has generous visitation rights with him, and there had been an ongoing custody dispute with the father of Caden. And there was a custody hearing here in 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Judge Worley presided over that hearing, and after learning of the efforts that Ms. Redden had taken to maintain a maternal role with her son despite her detention, she court-ordered the father of the child to take the boy to see Ms. Redden when she's serving the remainder of her sentence at least 1 time a month. She further court-ordered him to allow Ms. Redden to telephone her son when he's with him at least twice a week. I think they've set it up for Tuesdays and Sundays, and she encouraged Ms. Redden when she returned home to apply to the court for her own joint custody of her young son. Ms. Redden, while she has been detained, she has had some difficulties in the jail. Jails are difficult places. But she has also taken advantage of some of the things that were offered. She's completed a life skills program and a women's sexual health program. I have those certificates, and I'm also going to provide the court a certificate from Let me make sure I got one for the state here. From Mary Phillips High School, Ms. Redden had a difficult academic
Thank you.
experience, and the Drs. Ortiz and Drs. Herfkins would tell you it was her difficulties in school were a reflection of her difficulties at home. The chaos of at home bled into her behavior at school. But when she got to Mary Phillips High School, with that support and that structure, she made the principal's honor roll. So she can get there in the right set of circumstances. As mitigation, in reviewing the mitigating factors, I would contend that mitigating factor number one, that the forensic reports, and I can certainly present the doctors to provide further testimony regarding duress, coercion, threat, or compulsion. Ms. Redden had no defenses against Ron's domination. She, her background and her history left her vulnerable to him. She was physically abused, financially abused by him. She was aware that they had attacked a friend of hers. He had isolated her from her family. He used his gang affiliations as a threat. He had told her he would kill anyone who snitched on him. Even after they were in jail, he's manipulating her. I've got a letter where he sends her a love letter. When we get home, I'm going to marry you. I hope you're still mine. Please still love me. And then there was also threats sent through the jail at times where she, if you tell on me, you'll get hurt. The predator and the prey, duress, coercion, threat, and compulsion. Passive participant. Had Miss Redden not been there at all, the same events would have happened. Had Miss Redden not been with Ron with the laptop at the McDonald's, the same event would have happened. Mental and physical condition at the time, again, you've read the forensic reports, you know the state of mind and emotional condition that Ms. Redden lived in from a child. Age, immaturity, or limited mental capacity. She was 18 years old, emotionally immature, inexperienced in any set of background or circumstances that would have prepared her for these events or going through the serious nature of these charges and what her cooperation would mean to the state, to herself, while she's still all in this confused emotional place with Ron. Testified truthfully on behalf of the prosecution. Prior to arrest, and at an early stage in the process, voluntarily acknowledged wrongdoing to a law enforcement officer. When the police contacted her, she contacted her mother and came voluntarily to the police station. She did start out with what I call the party line, the party story. Ron and Travion had drilled into her what to tell the police when she was arrested, and that's what she told them. And then as they continued to interview her, she began to tell more and more and more of the truth, but we all know that's fairly typical of people when they're first arrested. Ron and Travion never told the whole truth. She's accepted responsibility for her criminal conduct. Accessory after the fact of first-degree murder is a very strong charge for your first criminal offense. She supported her young son. She has a support system in the community. She has a positive employment history. Interviews conducted by my investigator as well as my legal assistant, Alex Beeler, we were able to confirm that from 16 until the date she was arrested, she worked somewhere. Smithfield's Barbecue, Andy's in Wake Forest, Highway 55, Crabtree Valley. And during some periods of her detention, she has been a trustee at the Wake County Jail. She's got a good treatment prognosis. Miss Redden, until these events and meeting Dr. Herfkins and Dr. Ortiz, had never confided the events of her childhood to anyone, not even her mother. And the relief she has experienced in bringing that forward has been tremendous, and it has opened her to given her the insight to see the value in counseling, and given her, I think, more insights into the role model that she wants to be for her son and the safe, secure environment she wants to provide for him. She's eager to avail herself of counseling. Her mother has made arrangements to put that in place for Miss Redden when she comes home, and they're working together to get towards family counseling, not just for Miss Redden independently, but also for her and her mother together. Miss Redden enjoys working. She has no real history of alcohol use. She has used marijuana, but abstained successfully from that while she was pregnant. She's not abused any other drugs. In the right support and structure, Miss Redden has proven to herself, at least, that she can succeed academically and wants to develop her education and vocational skills so that she can provide for herself and her young son. The aggravating factor that the state asked us to stipulate to was that she engaged in a conspiracy with at least one other person and was not charged with a conspiracy. And Ron and Travion were principals. Maurice picked them up from North Hills. Miss Redden says he was aware that there had been a homicide because Ron told Maurice, I got a body, we got a body. Maurice has denied that. He was not charged in this offense. Miss Redden's aggravating factor, when you weigh that one factor in light of who the allegations are that she would have conspired with, her conduct is accessory after the fact, against the mitigating factors. The aggravating factor standing alone even is not a powerful aggravator in these facts, but when you balance it against the strength of the mitigation factors, then a mitigated sentence is warranted for Miss Redden in this set of circumstances. And we would ask that the court sentence her at the low end of the mitigated range. 44 months is a substantial sentence. She will have been incarcerated from the time she was 18 years old until 22 years old at least, maybe even longer depending on how DOC calculates good time and credit time, because most of that sentence will have been spent at the Wake County Jail. She's got a young son to raise, and the Department of Correction sentence would allow her an opportunity to start integrating back home, back into a real life, one step at a time. She'll have contact visitation with her son, and she will be able to get some counseling services there. I understand from Dr. Herfkins that the counseling at the women's prison is quite good. And then she'll come out on post-release supervision anyway, plus we've got probation in place, and I'm sure the court would make a mental health counseling a condition of that probation, and it would give Ms. Redden the support and structure and accountability that she needs to take this hard lesson that she's learned so very early in life and start learning how to make the right decisions and move in the right direction, and most importantly, to set very, very strong boundaries and be able to separate the good guys from the bad guys and get away from the bad guys before they take her in the direction that they're going in. But for the relationship with Ron Anthony, Ms. Redden, in all likelihood, would have never seen the inside of a courtroom.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, I appreciate the thorough presentation. As I said, I have reviewed the mental health reports you provided me. I don't believe I have any questions of either of the professionals that prepared those reports. All right, Ms. Redden, if you'll stand for me, please. Ms. Redden, you've pleaded guilty to 3 offenses, accessory after the fact to first-degree murder, and 2 counts of breaking and entering into motor vehicles. I'm going to enter 3 separate judgments in this case. For the offense of, and I find for the purposes of record, you have a prior record level 1 based on 1 prior record point. For the offense of accessory after the fact, first-degree murder, I'm going to enter a judgment, excuse me, within the mitigated range. I do find that you aided through your truthful testimony in the conviction of others responsible for these offenses. And for that offense, I'm ordering you incarcerated for a minimum term of 54 months, maximum term of 77 months in the custody of Division of Adult Corrections. That's an active sentence. You will receive credit for time served with respect to these offenses. For the first offense of breaking and entering a motor vehicle, I'm entering a judgment within the presumptive range, ordering you incarcerated for a minimum term of 6 months, maximum term of 17 months in the custody of Division of Adult Corrections. That is a suspended sentence. You're placed on supervised probation for a term of 24 months. This sentence is consecutive to the judgment that I just entered, namely, if you violate the terms of your probation, you'll be required to serve that period of incarceration as well. The third judgment I'm entering for the second offense of breaking and entering into motor vehicles is also in the presumptive range. It's identical, 6-month minimum, 17-month maximum in the custody of Division of Adult Corrections. Again, that sentence is suspended, but it is also consecutive to the 2 judgments that I've just entered. The probationary period of 24 months will run concurrent to the probation that I've just imposed. As conditions of your probation, you will be required to have assessments done both for substance abuse and mental health, and any requirements of those assessments will become part of your probationary requirements. I'm also requiring that you, during the period of probation, be gainfully employed or pursuing either vocational or academic training. You will be responsible for the costs of court. Ms. Godwin, you're appointed in this matter?
I am, Your Honor.
You're going to be responsible, ma'am, Ms. Redden, for the costs of court and the supervision fees in this case. I'm going to remit the attorney's fees as a civil judgment in this case, but you will be responsible during your probation to pay the costs of court and your supervision fees throughout your period of probation. I believe that's all.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll stand at ease or be in recess for 15 minutes.
Superior Court stands recess 15 minutes.
You think I can talk to her before they take